Hello. I think there's people out there now. It's very weird. So, good morning. My name is John Rostron. I'm the chair of the Association of Independent Promoters, and I'm here up in North Wales, in Glyndubdry, in North Wales. So apologies if there's any shakes or wobbles with the internet because the weather is very bad. I'm in the kind of area where the rain affects your internet connection. And I'm joined by Conal Dodds. Hi,
Morning.
Conal.
Hello. I'm tuning in from rainy Bristol today. In my office on Park Street in the middle of Bristol. I can see a unicorn's arse on the top of the City Hall and the cathedral. So, marvellous view, but a rainy one.
So this is the first, we're running two masterclasses this week, two promoter masterclasses. People have signed up for. So one this morning we're going to go into now, and then one on Friday with Clemence and Maz. Clemence is from Bird on the Wire Promotions, and Maz from Communion. Both promoters who are going to follow on and do run our event on Friday. But this morning is a conversation with Conal Dodds. And the purpose of these, they've been brought together by Tom Milner, who runs Atom Promotions down in Worthing. He is a member of our network, our Association of Independent Promoters, and he's really enjoyed kind of getting to know other promoters through that network, and wanted to use some of this strange time when he's not rescheduling shows and cancelling shows and booking new shows to try and bring different people together to try and learn from promoters. So there'll be a poll going out shortly to try and just see from everybody in the audience like who you are. We're expecting lots of the sign-ups are people that we think are promoters or want to be promoters, and so it's going to be sort of aimed at that kind of that's going to be the sort of the nature of the conversation. We want you to come away. Conal has 30 years of expertise in promoting, and we want you to come away with some of his expertise, take some of the best bits away, and also have some conversations about how it all works and what has stayed and what might change during the future. And in particular, we'll also reflect on COVID-19, of course. We can't ignore that. I'm going to put some links to the Association of Independent Promoters in the chat. So if you're not aware of who we are, we're quite a new organisation, but you can find us and join with us and connect with us there. And the other thing that we've been doing is we've been running a survey of promoters, not just in our membership, but a wider survey to try and find out how promoters are doing, which has been running, and a link will go up there if you want to fill that in. It'll take about 10 or 15 minutes to fill in. And we're using the information from that to help lobby for support for promoters during this time, which is, again, something that we'll come on and talk about. So some of that preamble was just to make sure that everybody was getting in the room. And we're live. I think everybody's arrived, and we're live on Facebook too. So we'll go into the chat now. So, Conal, thank you very much for joining us on the first one of these.
Welcome.
So we're going to start. We'll start at the beginning, I think. I think it's always interesting to understand how somebody got into promoting and where they came from. Everybody's story is unique. So would you like to tell us about your first steps, first of all? How did you get to promoting your first shows?
So I don't have any qualifications in the music industry at all. I dropped out of school, dropped out of A-levels, had a succession of shitty jobs in factories, trying to work out what I wanted to do. And then I was living in Hereford at the time, so I'll do the brief version of this. So a friend of mine knew that Robert Plant lived in Monmouth, which that was not very far away from Hereford, and we'd both seen this film, The Killing Fields, and we'd been to a talk at the town hall in Hereford about Pol Pot's regime in Cambodia, Kampuchea as it was at the time. And we were asked to help raise some money to build a well in Kampuchea. So it's a bit of a kind of Wayne's World thing. So my mate Rob went, well, Robert Plant lives in Monmouth. Let's get Robert Plant to do a gig for us. So essentially that's what we did. We hitched out to Monmouth every other week, after we'd finished in our factory job, and found someone that worked in his band, because he was living out there. Lots of musicians lived there because of Rockfield Studios. And basically we found out where he lived, and we went out to his house every week for 6 weeks until he was in, and we'd met his cleaner along the way and his girlfriend and the gardener, and so eventually we found out when he was going to be there. And so we did a gig. We organised it through a guy called Paul Martinez, who was his bass player, who played with Led Zeppelin at Live Aid. But you know, I didn't know he played with Zeppelin at the time. You know, this Paul Martinez, he was just this Keith Richards sort of character. Anyway, we did a gig. We raised 1,500 quid. Obviously, it was a pretty good start having Robert Plant as your first gig. And we went for a pint with the band the day after in Monmouth. And Paul said, "You're pretty good at this. You should be a promoter or a manager or something." And I took that spur really to try and just see if I could work something out in the music industry. So I was living in Hereford, so I persuaded a local landlord to let me do some little gigs at his pub. And I started packing out, I can't remember if it was a Wednesday or a Thursday night at the Booth Hall in Hereford, an upstairs room in a pub. And he could see obviously that I was bringing in a lot of people and making him some money. So then he gave me the Saturday night, and he started from there, talking to little agencies that would give me artists, completely clueless. So I know this is called a masterclass, but there are no master promoters. There are people that have managed to make more money than they've lost over the years. You know, if that makes you a master, then yeah, I'm a master. The good thing about promoting is that you don't need any qualifications. You need good ears. That's the most important thing. So I was doing gigs at the Booth Hall for a few months, and then that venue closed down, and the landlord got a bigger venue called the Entertainer in Hereford, which is down by the football ground. So I just started booking more shows there. Radical Dance Faction was the first artist that I booked that they had a proper rider, and I think Clive Underhill-Smith, if anybody remembers him, was the agent at the time. He gave me that show, and it probably the biggest stoner event that Hereford had ever seen at the time. There's 300 people all smoking weed, watching a crusty band from Reading, with us pumping out loads of smoke from the smoke machine to try and disguise the smell, so the landlord didn't realise what the punters were up to. But I literally started from the very bottom. Didn't have a clue what to do. It was very green. It was very naive. So I think that gave me a really good grounding in what I do as a promoter, because I've done all the jobs. I've done all the crap jobs. I've done making tickets. Printing this is obviously before the internet. Hand printing tickets. And writing numbers on them, putting them in local record shops, doing my own fly posting, designing the posters myself, with bits of letraset and cutting out pictures and gluing them on and photocopying them, really shitty advertising. But obviously picking up a bit of knowledge as I went along, getting hold of the local newspaper and finding a guy that, there wasn't a music column in the Hereford Times, but there was a guy that was really into music. So I used to write the copy effectively. I'd write a press release, and they just used to print it verbatim. So those kind of little measures. But talking to lots of agents that I could get a hold of on the phone, and it's a very different landscape now to 1990. There weren't a huge number of people around promoting concerts. Every city, I live in Bristol now. Bristol's got dozens of venues with probably dozens of promoters that are doing gigs multiple nights every night of the week. That wasn't happening in those days. Obviously, I was a big fish in a small pond, because Hereford didn't have anybody at all doing gigs, which is something that I've realised that over the years, that it doesn't matter what town you live in. If you live in Worthing, or you live in Coventry, or you live in Salford, if you're determined enough, you can make something happen in your city. The cities that have got themselves on on the circuit over the years, I think have been driven by the promoters. Look at Ian Bennington in Portsmouth. He's been there as long as I have. The only reason that Portsmouth has always had so many shows is because of Ian Bennington. He's the person that's driven that scene down there. So whilst you might be at a disadvantage if you don't live in a major city, if you're not promoting in a major city, I think that small promoters have definitely still got a place in the industry, and you can make something happen. Anyway, so I'll move on to kind of how I came through. I don't know how long you want to have on this bit, John. Stop me if it's dull or.
No, it's not at all. It's not at all. I mean, I think that's we're running a survey of the people that are in the room, watching this, and online, and over half of them are established concert promoters. And of the ones, that is a familiar story. That sort of running around, doing lots of different things, trying to make something happen wherever you are.
Yeah,
it doesn't normally start with Robert Plant. So that's exceptional.
No, I understand that.
What was maybe a contact with agents, maybe not. So what was the step then to kind of like, you're just a one-man band then? How did you then get it? Did you start working for a company, or what?
No. So I did. So I had a job at the time. When I was starting doing the gigs in Hereford, probably like a lot of promoters when they start out. So I had a job and I was photocopying my posters at work. I was trying to make sneaky phone calls during the day to agents and managers and bands, etc. And I just started getting some breaks, really. There's a guy called Dave Stacey, who's no longer with us, God rest him. He was the first agent at a big agency. He was at ITB, and he gave me a gig with a wedding present. I did a Herefordshire Hall. That was probably in about end of 91. So I've been doing it for about 18 months, and I was still working as well. But then the place I was working at, I got made redundant because there was a bit of a recession on. Got made redundant, so I had a bit of redundancy money, and then I went on a course with the Prince's Trust and got some funding from them. And all I had to do was come up with a business plan. I had to do a course with them, so I had to be unemployed. So the only time I've ever been unemployed in my life was I had to be unemployed for 4 weeks to be able to get onto this course with the Prince's Trust. And then there was a government scheme called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which was a funding for young people under 25 starting their own businesses. So the Enterprise Allowance Scheme gave me 40 quid a week. The Prince's Trust gave me a grant of 1,500 quid, and I bought a little PA system so that I could do my own little shows. So once I had the PA system, I had a mate who used to help me with that because he was a builder who had a van. So that was the transport sorted out. So I started expanding my reach regionally. So started doing gigs from Hereford, doing gigs in Worcester and Kidderminster and Tamworth. And then I went to see a gig play at TJ's in Newport, and met John, who was the J in TJ's, who was just such a top fella and became a great friend of mine over the next 15, 20 years. And he essentially said, if you want to come and do gigs, you can come and do gigs here. You can have the venue for free. Bring your own PA system. I'll take the bands round to my house and feed them. And that was probably the Kickstarter for me, realistically, getting more established artists. Because then I was able to do shows in Hereford. I started doing shows in Newport as well. Linked up with another promoter who was doing gigs in Kidderminster and Tamworth. So then suddenly I was starting to get on the kind of circuit a little bit. And then Clive Underhill, again, who was a good help to me in the beginning, he said, you should start doing gigs in Bristol. No one's doing gigs in Bristol like you are. There isn't really a regular indie promoter. So he knew a venue that had just had a big PA system installed. So we started doing gigs at the Tropic Club in Bristol, which is in Stoats Croft. And I think my second gig there was the Cranberries for 50 quid. So I started doing a regular Wednesday night at at the Tropic Club. This was again about 92, and then coming to Bristol, I went around, looked at the other venues, met the people that ran the Fleece, and the Fleece said, do you want to move your shows from the Tropic Club to the Fleece, which is a bigger venue, 400 capacity. So I started a Wednesday night at the Fleece, and we got in just at, I was fortunate that at the time there was an explosion in indie music and guitar music, and it was just before Britpop happened. So I was booking Pulp and Elastica and Radiohead and all those bands that came before Britpop. And so suddenly every Wednesday night I was doing 400 people, pretty much guaranteed, paying the bands flat fees, I had Radiohead for £100, those kind of shows. And then some of the agents that I'd done smaller shows started to give me slightly bigger gigs. People like Paul Boswell at Free Trade, Mick Griffiths at Asgard, Charlie Myatt, who was, I think he was at ITB in those days. So they were supporting me and giving me bigger gigs. So I started doing shows at the Beer Keller in Bristol and the Victoria Rooms in Bristol. And I was doing bands like The Fall and the Buzzcocks and Buffalo Tom. And I used to, so mostly indie kind of guitar stuff. But I was obviously becoming part of the touring circuit that existed in those days. And so because of that, I knew lots of the agents. So lots of the agents that people probably deal with on a regular basis now, if you've been around for a while. So the Mike Greek and Jeff Meal, Emma Banks, Charlie Myatt, those are all agents that were coming up at the same time as me. They'd been in the industry for, 2 or 3 years themselves. We're all similar age, I guess. I'm 53 now. So I was lucky that I met a load of good people at the right time, and I was hardworking. I never stiffed anybody. Everyone always got paid. I was honest. I was probably too honest. I know a lot of. I wasn't a ducker or a diver. I was just pretty straight, and I was a good promoter. I was a hard worker. I'm a big believer in, work hard and be nice to people will get you a long way in the industry, and that certainly helped. So I can't remember, tail end of '93, I think it was, I got a phone call from Charlie Myatt to say that there was a bigger company called MCP who had a vacancy. They wanted a new promoter, someone that would come in and find them new talent, because another guy, Chris York, had moved to SJM. So I rang up MCP. They said, yeah, send us your CV. So I hand wrote a CV of all the bands I'd worked with, faxed it through, because I'd moved on to having a fax machine by that point. I didn't have a mobile phone, didn't have a car. Used to get mates to drive me around between my gigs, and got an interview at MCP. Went up there, met Stuart Galbraith and Tim Parsons, had a hour-long chat in their office, then went for a pint with Stuart, and then drove home. And I had a gig the next night at TJ's in Newport. And while I was there, the phone, those days didn't have a mobile, so you had to tell people where you're going to be at a certain point in time. Got a phone call at TJ's from Stuart to say, we want to offer you a job. So MCP offered me a job in '94. So I started in, I think, February '94, and Britpop was happening. So suddenly, some of the little bands that I'd been promoting, like Elastica and Pulp and Radiohead, and I started doing Oasis around that time. All these bands suddenly started to explode, and I was within a company structure of MCP, who they were a company that promoted U2 and REM and Bon Jovi and Bryan Adams. They had lots of big stadium artists, but they were the comfort blanket around me to teach me how to be a better promoter. So I think there were two promoters that taught me how to do things that were kind of invaluable. So one of them was marketing, and Tim Parsons taught me how to market concerts. He was at MCP, so he taught me how to sell tickets. He taught me how to find the audience. It's not just a case of putting up the poster or the advert or whatever else and hoping for the best. He taught me to be more creative. I see it these days. There's no, we get sent artwork from brand new bands, and some of the artwork I get sent sometimes it's just unbelievably shit. It's like, how do you expect me to sell a concert ticket for a relatively unknown band when you've sent me a really shitty arty image? Or sometimes it's not the band, sometimes it's just some really obscure artwork. You've got to be able to sell yourself. And anyway, so Tim taught me how to sell tickets, and Oasis exploded in the next, from that, probably from the tail end of '94, and I just hung on to their coattails pretty much, and went with it. And
can I just before we get, because there's a clear junction here with you stepping into MCP and the framework, and I just want to pause a little bit and just reflect on that period through Bristol, because within our Association of Independent Promoters, in the survey we've just put out, about 48% of those people who filled in the survey are freelancers, or small, or like you were then, right? Little one-person operations.
Mm-hmm.
And then 52% are companies, right? So they're anything from a couple of people upwards to much larger companies. So there's a lot of people out there that are in that space that you were in Bristol. And there's a few things that I think are quite interesting there. First of all, the idea that there wasn't a kind of good promoter in Bristol feels incredible, right? Like, you can't imagine that happening somewhere these days. Or does it? As a national promoter, when you're looking around, I mean, I'd like to hear what you think about that. But the other thing to think about is, in that time, what was that like? What was driving you? What were you learning? What were you getting wrong? Because you started to touch upon that with like Tim helping you with marketing, but were you making money, losing money? What was just, because that will sort of resonate, I think.
I was hand to mouth. I was married, and my wife had a job, so the focus wasn't just on me to be making money. I was making a profit though. I was making a small profit, but I was making money. There weren't the huge number of shows there are these days. This is obviously pre-internet. I didn't have a mobile phone till I was 26. I was 26 in 94, 27 in 94. I got my first mobile when I went to MCP. So communication didn't happen. There were no online ticket sales. So this, it's a very different place. It's like the dark ages to my kids now. If you explain kind of what it was like. But there were, because the music industry wasn't diluted with too many shows and too many artists and agents and promoters and venues, the shows that did happen tended to do pretty well. I could put 150 people in a pub in Hereford or Tamworth or Worcester to see a relatively, not obscure, but these were the days where it's only really in the early 90s when you started to see indie guitar bands getting into the charts. I remember when the Wonder Stuff got in the top 40, that felt like a victory for the indie world. They were one of the first big indie bands. They played at Bescott Stadium in Walsall, where they were from. They were probably the first indie band to do an open air show. So this wasn't the norm. We were we were below the radar of the general public mostly. It wasn't a closed shop, obviously, but it was the underground.
So there wasn't like a huge amount of competition, people keen to see new bands, or because
there were enough people to see new bands to a level, but not many of those bands were breaking through beyond doing 400 people. the Britpop thing exploded everything. It suddenly made those bands they became the mainstream, and bands like Oasis and Pulp and Radiohead kicked the door through, and everybody kind of ran through behind them. And to an extent, indie rock and guitar bands have been, they've been chart bands ever since. They can have #1 albums, they play arenas and stadiums and whatever else. But obviously, not all bands ever get to that point in time. And probably the biggest skill as a promoter, it's got to be your ears. It's picking acts that you. I only promote acts that I like, or that I think that I can, or that I like and I think I can sell. I couldn't say hand on heart that I listen fervently to every single album by every artist that I promote, but I know that I have to be able to sell what I promote, and probably 90% of the acts that I work with, I do like their music. I couldn't sell it. I couldn't promote something I didn't like. I've never promoted pop music in the traditional sense. I've never done boy bands or Little Mix or any of those sort of things, because I don't like that music. I don't get it. I can't tell the difference. Same with, I don't know, noisy metal bands. I can't tell the difference between one band or the other. I couldn't tell you that one band should be playing at Mother's Ruin in Bristol and one should be playing at Wembley Arena, because I don't really get that music. So I promote promote stuff that I understand. That's the main thing, And every time, just because I'll forget to say it otherwise, is that the times when I've lost a lot of money is when I've tried to step outside of what I know, and I've taken a gamble, and I know I've taken a gamble as well, because you've got to go with again. That's the other thing. You can't teach someone a gut instinct. I think you've got to go with that's my advice. Be nice to people, trust your ears, go with your gut instinct. That's helped me. Every time I've trusted my gut instinct, I've tended to be right. Not always, obviously, but every time I've stepped out of what I know, generally fucked it up and lost money. So
well, that's what I was going to ask. One of the skills of a promoter, I think, or that enables some promoters to still promote, is to be able to lose money and to go through that process, right? For some people, that first time they lose money, I mean, we know promoters that have just not turned up at the night because they can't face what's going to happen, and they do a runner, right? But that's not what the Association of Independent Promoters is about. There's a group of people that have, every single person has lost money. So can you remember some of your first losses and what that was like? That would have been in that time, right? And what, how did you get through that to continue to be, to want to do it?
I mean, I always paid people. I didn't have a cash injection when I started out. The money I had from the Prince's Trust, I bought a PA system with. The enterprise allowance was £40 a week. So there was, like I said, I was really, really naive. There was no real business plan. It was literally, it's kind of, I went for it. There wasn't a huge amount of competition. I didn't lose money. I didn't lose much money on very many gigs, but even if I did, the fees were relatively low in those days. The most amount of money I probably paid to anybody until 94. A band who would play at Fleece and Firkin, it would be a £5 ticket, and maximum maybe a £4 ticket. They'd be getting £300. That'd be the maximum fee people were getting. Again, I was clueless about deals. I used to ring up agents and say, "How much is your band?" It wasn't a case of working out what the ticket price is going to be and the capacity and working out your costs. I would literally ring up people and say, "I really like the sound of this band. How much are they?" And they would quote a figure, and I'd either say, "Yeah," or "I'll take that on," or "No, I wouldn't." It was only, I probably didn't do any proper budgeting for gigs until sort of 93 or something like that, where I was doing bands like Radiohead and whatever else, Elastica, and people like Jeff Craft I was dealing with in Charlie Myatt, they expected you to send a costing. I can't remember someone taught me how to do I can't remember who it was, but someone must have taught me how to do a costing at some point. I wasn't VAT registered either, so that was always a pain in the arse when you came across a band that were VAT registered, because I'd done a set of costings that hadn't allowed for that. Remember the first time it happened, and I don't know what the VAT rate would have been in those days, maybe 17.5%. Rings a bell.
Were there so overages, so paying a band a fee plus a split, so that existed then, but did it?
Yeah, it started to happen.
What kind of percent? Yeah, and what percent was it at?
It was the good old days. It was 70% in those days. Okay. And deals weren't, a versus deal wasn't a thing. All the deals were plus deals. So in your list of costs, you would have a built-in promoter profit. So
you would have a line that said
you'd have a line that said we just used to write built-in profit. So generally, if you're paying a band £100, you probably have a built-in profit of £100 as well. Yeah. So that effectively you made £100 before they started earning a percentage, and most deals were 70%. So I'd be doing a gig at the Fleece for a band, and they'd be on £100 plus 70% after costs and built-in profit.
Yeah. So you take they'd get their 100 plus 70%. You take your 100 plus 30%.
Yeah. And lots of bands did break percentage because, like I said, that there wasn't a huge amount of competition. So you'd often sell out, but you weren't selling out in advance. This is pre-internet, so you're not selling tickets online. You're selling tickets in record shops. See tickets, who were way ahead actually back in those days. Way ahead were the first people that brought in telephone sales to a huge, to huge numbers in the kind of indie world. But up until that point, people, you'd buy a ticket in a record shop or a venue. You'd physically go in and you'd come away with either an actual printed ticket or something that the promoter had made up themselves, with a number on it. And we'd maybe sell, if you sold 50% of your tickets in advance, that would be a great thing. We would do huge walk-ups. Walk-ups were a thing. That was a thing. We didn't realize we didn't have the comfort factor of knowing that we'd sold most of our tickets in advance, probably until maybe when I was doing my regular nights in Bristol Fleece on a Wednesday night, when people started to see that the gigs would always sell out. So then you might sell 200 tickets for a hot show, but then you'd sell 200 on the night as well. So it was, but it never felt scary. It never felt scary that, wow, we've only sold 200 tickets and we need 300 tickets to break even. Because the deals were pretty fair, to be honest. The deals were fair. There wasn't an expectation of getting sellout money in those days. The deals were fair. The deals were 70% mostly. It was only post the Britpop thing where suddenly all these bands started selling out, and then more promoters are starting to emerge, that the deal started to get tighter. And then it was 75%, and then it was 80, and so it went on.
And how did you manage? Was cash flow a thing then? So nowadays, back then, no internet banking, but nowadays internet banking, so you pay your deposits up front on backs, and there's quite a lot of costs people require those backs payments to pay. So cash flow can become quite a thing for small.
Look, it really does sound like it. No, it wasn't even a consideration. I mean, it does sound like the dark ages. Bear in mind, there's no internet, so the advancing would be the contracts. Sometimes you might get a phone call from a tour manager, the day before the show, but most you didn't. You'd have a conversation with the agent. You'd fax in the costs. You'd phone him. You'd agree the deal. He would post you a contract which you never sent back. You never signed it anyway. But you'd have already told the agent what the times were. So arrive at 2:00, sound check at 3, doors at, blah, blah, blah. That was the advance. You would have a rider and sometimes the band might have a spec on there, but that would be it. So the bands would turn up on the day. Most people didn't have a mobile phone. So if the band were late, unless they managed to get to a phone box and ring the venue you were in, you just had to sit around waiting for them to turn up. I had a band turn up in Bristol once, in Hereford once, about 8:30, and they were bringing the PA. Do you know what I mean? They'd broken down on the way. But we didn't know because they couldn't phone us. So
I think it's amazing. I think when, and again, a lot of people, promote these people, everyone's promoting now, the amount of paperwork and advance, and this, the flow of artwork approval and, this approval, that approval supports the advancing. There's a huge volume of emails and exchange that go into all levels of shows now, right? Which is
the level of professionalism now is, it really is from a Porsche to, a Model T Ford when I first started out. It's incredible the difference in professionalism, which the internet has just transformed the industry beyond recognition. The flow of information, advancing, marketing, ticketing, it's a completely different. It's a completely different industry, completely different. And there were a lot of really bright people in it. There weren't a lot of really bright people necessarily in those days. There were enough, but there weren't hundreds. There weren't dozens and dozens of promoters and agents, whatever else. It was quite a niche thing to do. You had to explain, if you're a promoter, what it actually meant to people. People didn't really. If you said if you're a promoter, they didn't really understand what you did. So the internet was the biggest thing, and the first thing that happened, I think, was even pre-internet was ticketing was changed by companies like Way Ahead, who became C, having huge rooms full of people that could take multiple phone calls at the same time. Setting up free phone numbers. I set up a free phone number, an 0800 number, for an Oasis gig at Brighton Centre in 1995. C Tickets had never done that before. They got us a dedicated phone number for that one show. That's the kind of thing that we would do in those days. In a way, this is kind of like ancient history, because it bears little reference to where we're at now and how we promote. But in the same way that 10 years ago, everything has changed in the last 10 years, and it'll change again in the next 10 years. It is a continually evolving industry, and I think that if you want to exist in the industry in 10 years time, or 20 years or 30 years time, you've got to be prepared to change, and you've got to be prepared to embrace new ways of doing things and embrace new technology and new forms of marketing. It's you can't stay static. I've had to learn a lot of I've had to learn a lot of things over the years, and I'm not great at technology, and I'm hopeless at digital marketing. I've got some really great people that work for me that can do that for me, but I've got a sense of how it works. But I run a company now, so I don't need to be specifying my time on having an expert knowledge of every little part of the industry. But if you're a local promoter out there and you're a one-man band, you do need that skill set, because you're still having to do everything that I was doing 30 years ago. You're still having to deal with your ticket agency. You're not fly posting yourselves these days. You probably aren't even fly posting at all, but you're doing your marketing yourselves. But the basics of promoting are still the same. You've got to find the artists. You've got to find artists you think other people are going to come and want to pay money to see. And it is very, very competitive. It's very competitive. That's something that has incredibly increased in the last 30 years, is just the amount of people that are in the industry now, the huge number of artists there are, the huge number of agents, of agencies, of promoting companies, of individual promoters. The tough part of being in the music industry is to keep going, and it's to be able to sustain a career. And we were chatting before we came on, weren't we, John? And I was trying to use a football analogy. You've got to be a bit, to be a successful promoter, you've just got to be like Kevin Keegan's Newcastle was a few years ago. He might let 3 goals in at the back, but they'd score 4 or 5 up front. So you might have a few loss-making shows, but as long as you've got enough profit-making shows that can offset that, that will sustain you a career as a promoter, because there isn't a single promoter that of any consequence anyway that doesn't lose money on shows. It's obviously much easier to lose money on shows than it is to make a profit. The easy way to make a small fortune in the music industry is to start with a large one. So it's you've got to be ballsy. You've got to be ballsy as a promoter, and I've always thought that compared to, I've got friends who've got a variety of jobs, decorators and doctors and social workers and teachers and whatever else. Most of those people can switch off their jobs when they come home. They can work 9 till 5 or 10 till 6 or 8 till 4 if you're a decorator, because they always go home early. Our job never stops, because once you're finished being in an office during the day or at home during the day, you're out working at a show and you're doing late hours and you're doing long hours, and it's a lifestyle. It's a total vocation. It's not something you can just switch off at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock every day. If you're a postman, you can do that. You can't if you're a concert promoter. You have to live that lifestyle, and it's really hard. It's really hard, and you have to live. I think promoters are very resilient people, because you have to live with quite a level of disappointment quite often. You'll be trying to get a band and you don't get that band. I still get that now. You try and get an act that you really want to promote and it goes to somebody else. That's disappointing. But back in the day, 20 years ago, that used to hurt me. I'd be really, really disappointed, and sometimes, I never got despondent, but you feel a huge level of disappointment when you fought hard to get an artist and the agent or the manager gave it to somebody else. I just move on now.
What about when you're working with acts and then they move on? Sometimes it's or they move not on. That sounds wrong, but have you lost where you've been working with bands and lost bands? A lot of promoters, they really struggle with that. Like particularly the grassroots promoters who build somebody up and then they feel like somebody takes them on later.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I'm probably one of the protagonists of the national promoter taking away the shows from the regional promoters, because when I joined MCP as a little indie promoter, even though they were a big company promoting all these city hall shows and arenas and stadium gigs, I was a little indie club promoter. I didn't know any other way than promoting bands from the ground up, and so I started as a national promoter, promoting bands from the grassroots upwards, and that probably hadn't been done much before. So myself and Chris York, and then a bit later on, people like John Cornwell, we were suddenly in competition with the regional promoters, because we were getting in earlier with artists, because if you didn't get in early with the artists as a national promoter, then somebody else would be. It's even more cutthroat these days. There are some artists are already promised to a promoter before they've even played a show, which is incredibly frustrating. Realistically, national promoters shouldn't be promoting concerts in any venue that's under 200 people, because we can't do a better job than than an independent promoter, someone that runs that venue or based in that city. How could we? Because we've got hundreds of shows we promote every year. If you're an independent promoter that might promote 3 gigs a week in that city, you should have that town locked down better than anybody. Unfortunately for the independent promoter, it's the way that the industry has traveled in that direction in the last 25 years. But it's not been that's been a gradual process. It's always been there. There has still been the room for a really good independent promoter to come out. Look at Future Sound in Leeds, Colin Oliver, for instance, or Now Wave in Manchester. These sort of promoters, 1 Inch Badge, all the small indies that have come up over the last few years that are they've got really big acts themselves. Rock Feedback, Parallel Lines, Communion, Eat Your Own Ears. There are the opportunities for independent promoters to come through, but you've got to find. I think that as someone that employs younger promoters, my advice to them these days is, especially from a national point of view, is that they should be targeting the people that they're working with as much as the artists that they're going to try and work with. Target the agents. There's no point you ringing up a really well-established agent and saying, I want to promote your hot new band, because if you're a new promoter or a relatively small independent promoter, firstly, they're not going to know who you are, and secondly, they might have a relationship with someone else that's lasted 20 years. So if they're going to give their hot new band to someone that they know, okay. But that's the established people that are, the agents that I've been dealing with for years. But if you're a promoter who's 25, you need to find the 25-year-old agents. You need to find the equivalent that I dealt with, the equivalent of Charlie Meyer or Mike Greek or Emma Banks or Jeff Meal. You need to find their equivalents now and develop a relationship with those people so that next time that they've got a new band, they'll give it to you in that territory, because that's the way it should work. I don't think the industry needs to change beyond, in that respect. The most important thing is, I think, in promoting, the most important things are relationships. People need to trust you. You need to do a good job for people. You need to be able to prove that you can sell tickets. You need to be reliable with your payments, your deposits, your paperwork, your advancing. You've got to be a lot more professional than you were when I first started out, and I've become professional in that respect. But it took me many years of making schoolboy errors. But I think it is still relationship based, and hopefully it's still music based. Promote the stuff that you know. Promote what you understand. Promote if you like something. I've always thought, if I like something, there's a pretty good chance that lots of other people will like it too. Because I don't think I've got particularly narrow tastes. I'm not a music snob. I think that I've got fairly mainstream ears. So my take on it is that generally I think I'm right. Generally, if I think something can do really well, I think 30 years has given me the ears for a certain type of music. I think I can predict, to some degree, how successful an artist can be. I don't get all those artists, because there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of young promoters out there that have got much better ears than I have, and who've developed their own relationships with people. So, but target the agents that are going to give you regular business. Build up those relationships with people, because you're not going to get you can't get the artists without dealing with the agents. Most artists are going to have an agent of some description. Any artist of consequence generally is going to have a booking agent, and you need to build up a relationship and build up trust with those people.
Yeah, because you talked about relationship with agents. There's two things I want to touch upon. So your advice to some younger promoters or newer promoters, starting out, find it difficult to build a dialogue with agents because a lot of the agents are London based. They might not be, like they're in their equivalent of Hereford or wherever, and like you said, it's super busy. Agents are much easier to find now. You look on the band, you find them on Facebook, and there's the agent contact. So they're getting all of these emails. So it's, for some people, it's harder to establish that relationship with the agent, just because of busyness. Is there any advice, do you think, that you could imagine that you see with the younger promoters in your team? What do they do to establish those relationships? But I also kind of then just want to, you're 30 years in, right? And you're doing stadium shows and arena shows, and you still got relationships with these people that you've had for 30 years. So how do you sustain? Have you, what's that like as well? Because surely you've had some ups and downs. So advice to the younger promoters, first of all, and then just how do you keep a relationship over 30 years? Or is it a professional relationship,
So well, like I said, with younger promoters, I think that, back in the day, there was no internet, there was no email, so you had to use your personality to get on with people. So you'd ring up somebody cold to talk to them about one of their artists, and just try and get a conversation going with them. Talk about what you were doing and the bands that you were into, and you might have seen a hot new band play, supporting someone else. So, it was all consuming for me. If I wasn't promoting a gig, I was going to a gig. I started a fanzine, for instance, with a guy called Mark Dawson, who was based in Kidderminster. So because we were doing a fanzine, we were then talking to press agents and independent press agents. So we were going to lots of gigs to interview bands. I interviewed Nirvana and Mudhoney and EMF and Carter and the Wonder Stuff and loads of people. We did about 8 issues of it. But
can I just say, it's funny hearing Nirvana next to EMF, like in the same.
Yeah. Well, it's the same era. And they were local because they were Forest Dean, EMF. But again, that just created a whole new group of people that I hadn't encountered before. So it was the press people, and it was the record company people, and I got on there used to be a few mailing lists those days where you would get sent records every week. The shows that I was doing in Hereford, you'd have an indie disco with it. So you'd get sent records every week, and you'd have to fill out this kind of return sheet that tracked, the response from the audience and this kind of thing. I just tried to cover all bases really, but I put myself out there. I was always the first person at a gig and the last person at the gig at the end of the night. So
did you ever burn out? I mean, this sounds like full on. And again, for a lot of promoters, it is all consuming. They get up in the morning in their underpants to do their ticket counts, and then they're marketing shows all day. They advance the show, they rep the show, they go out with, they do the show, they put the band into their hotel or back on the road, and they're back again. I mean,
I haven't yet. No,
I haven't yet.
I haven't burnt out yet. So my first marriage didn't survive though. So that was definitely a consequence of the amount of time and effort I was putting into this, and that's also something not to be underestimated. We don't keep regular hours. I've got 3 kids, and I'm married, and it's tough maintaining relationships in the music industry because our main working time is in the evening. Now that's most people's social time. Obviously, everyone that comes to a gig, that's their social time, but it's our job, it's our work. And if you're out several nights a week, and you got to be prepared to make that sacrifice, I think. And that's been one of the tough things for me over the years, is trying to find that balance of maintaining the home life and having a successful career as a promoter. It's really, really difficult, and there isn't an easy answer. And I know many people's relationships that have failed, and I know many people that are single who've never been able to find that right person. So I think that you have to look at the human aspect of what we do as well. It's not all figures and deals and budgets and money and whatever else. Ultimately, this is what I take my life more importantly than I do promoting a concert. Your relationship and your family life and your home setup, but that's the most important thing. And you're not going to be able to function well as a promoter if you haven't got that side of things sorted out. I think it can make a huge difference. Thankfully, I've got a very forgiving wife, Lee, who's been very supportive, and I ask her advice on certain things as well. And I think that everyone should do that, because no one's a master at what we do. Going back to the young promoters, you got to put yourself out there. It's not what you're not going to build a relationship by emailing somebody, are you? That isn't going to work. So you can go to festivals and you can meet people at festivals. You can go to other people's gigs and try and find out. If you go to any gig in London, the manager, the agent, and the record company are going to be in that room. Okay, so even if you've got to buy a ticket to go to the gig, you can find the people you need to find if you're prepared to put the legwork in. I used to come to London all the time. First and foremost was, the fanzine gave me the opportunity to do that, talking to people. But then when I would come down to do that, which was mainly just to come home with a bag full of records, but I would then go and see a few of the agents that I'd been dealing with. I'd take them for a pint, go to a gig in the evening. You got to put the groundwork in. You've got to go to the Great Escape, for instance. If you're a promoter, you don't go to the Great Escape. What are you doing? Invest that money in the ticket. It's not expensive. If you've got to sleep on someone's floor or club together with some other promoters, talk to Mr. Rostron, who probably can help put a load of promoters in contact with each other, so you can maybe all share a house cheaply together or something. Hire somewhere. You need to be at that. You don't need to go to Austin. Austin's a great thing, South by Southwest. It's sunshine in March and whatever else. You'll see as many people and many artists and as many agents at the Great Escape in Brighton every year. I think it's a really great opportunity to meet everybody.
I just want to touch upon something. So, you've obviously had lots of great relationships, and you talked a lot about relationships. You don't have to name names, but you must have had some. Has there been moments where you just haven't connected with someone, or has there been a moment where you've had a relationship and that's just fallen apart? And how does that, if that has happened, how has that affected you professionally? Or is it that you can just kind of go through and go, these are the people I'm going to have a relationship with, and these people I'm not, and that's okay?
All of the above, really. So having done it for a long time, obviously there are certain people that I will continue to work with, and there'll be some people that I've chosen that I don't want to work with anymore, and there'll be some people that have chosen not to work with me anymore. I've made some mistakes. I got sacked by one artist for essentially getting drunk and being not over familiar with them, being a bit. I got pissed at a Beck gig at Manchester Apollo. I was co-promoting it, so I wasn't doing anything at that gig. SGM were running it. I got pissed and asked Beck for a jokey photo of where I'd be punching him in the stomach. Not really, I was just pretending. I got sacked for that behaviour by being drunk and over familiar with the artists. I've been sacked for challenging an agent by essentially by not offering the money that they were looking for. That's going to happen all the time. That's part of the deal process. But some people take it personally, that it's a personal slant if you're not prepared to offer the money they think that they should be getting. We have a thing. I mentioned it to you before. We have a thing Crosstown, it's called the bus. We put people on the bus. So at various times, different agents have been driving the bus. Paul
Where does this
Boswell.
bus go?
Paul Boswell was the driver. Neil Warnock was the conductor for a while, and bands that lost us a lot of money are sitting on the top deck of the bus. They're never going to get off at the Crosstown stop because we've run our course with them. But
can people get off the bus though, or are they once they're on?
Of course, they can get off the bus if we kiss and make up, or that artist that's previously lost us a lot of money might make a blinding album, and we decide that actually we'll give it another go. We're pretty loyal to artists that we've promoted. I've promoted in the same way that they've been loyal back. I've worked with Super Fairy Animals since '94. I've worked with Ash since '94. I've worked with Noel Gallagher since 1994. So certain people I've got a really long relationship with, and that means a lot to me as well, that those people have been prepared to stick with me. And I'd do anything for those three acts, because I've moved companies in that time, went from MCP to Metropolis and now to Crosstown, and those acts have always stayed with me. So that's meant a lot. Artists change manager, change agents, so not every artist I've ever promoted I still promote. But I think outside of punching back, mock punching back, I don't think that, and I'm quite happy if someone sort of corrects me to the contrary, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think I've been sacked for doing a bad job on an artist. I might have been. There's a lot of acts that have come and gone over the years, and generally I think that there's a kind of unwritten rule that great show, great tour, great success, it's great manager, great agent. Shows that are tanking, it's shit promoter. We're the ones that kind of get the flack. But we've all gone into those tours with our eyes open. The manager, the agent, the promoter. We've all decided that that's where those artists should be pitched at, and collectively we've got it wrong. If you've done a really bad job on something, then yes, it's your fault. But if you've overpitched something, that's the promoter's fault. If you put a show into a 400 capacity venue and you offer on 400 people and it does 200, that is your fault. You can make money at every level. You can make money on 50 people as long as your deal's right. You can make money on 100 people as long as the fee is right and the ticket price is right. If you sell 100 tickets and you've got your deal right, you can make money at that level. But if you overpitch your artist, or you allow yourself to be talked into putting an artist into a venue that they can't sell the tickets for, then yeah, that is your fault.
Well, some promoters, I was going to say, some promoters find those. So again, you can reflect on this at the level you're at now, where you're looking and booking national tours. But some of the promoters, when you're more on the receiving end, you're in Hereford, mm-hmm. and you're one stop on a 10-stop tour, and the agent's kind of coming to you. Some promoters find it very difficult when an agent is saying, we'd like to do a show at this level in your town, 300 cap. And you think, well, actually the artist is only worth 100 tickets. And some people find those conversations very difficult or impossible.
You just got to get on with it. You just got to learn to, ultimately you're running your own business. So you don't have to take that show on. Now, obviously, if you don't take that show on from that agent, then there's a danger that whoever, because they will find someone to take it on, probably. If they find someone else that they then develop a better relationship with, then you may not work with that agent again. So you've got, it's a balance, and the only way you're ever going to know is by trial and error. And I know that's, there isn't an easy route to being promoter. There isn't a set of guidelines that say do this, this, and this, and you'll be successful. It doesn't exist. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of it, though, because you don't need any qualifications. Anybody can be a promoter. I've got no qualifications in business or in the music industry. I went into it completely naively and by force of personality, but by being prepared to work really hard and put everything into it, managed to be successful. I think that goes a long way.
But do you think on the flip side, so I completely agree with that. I think that's one of the great, it's very democratic, isn't it? Anybody can enter.
Of course they can.
Do you think on the other side though, like the flip side is doesn't seem like, this is my opinion, but it doesn't seem like there's any standard ways of working. So if I was in Hereford wanting to receive a show, there isn't a standard price for the band. There isn't a standard costing sheet. Some promoters work at 70%, some work at 80, 85. Some do build in a promoter's profit, some don't.
Who are the ones who work at 70%?
Well,
I want to talk to those agents because
I know a promoter who, again, like in that naive way, did his first show with an agent, put the show tickets on sale before the agent had said they could go on sale, and had set his own ticket price like a club night, so £5 and £6 and £7.
Okay.
But this is very interesting. There isn't like a standard way of working. Do you think it would be better once you enter if there was some more standards? Do you think that would be helpful, or do you think it's the kind of free for all space is good?
I think it could be helpful. I think it could be helpful if there was some sort of practices that everybody was happy to adopt. If all the agents said that, someone came up with a blueprint, even if it was each agency that says, what you don't want is every agency doing something different. I had to submit some figures for an arena artist a couple of years ago, and instead of me sending my normal costings to them, I had to fill it out onto some American accountant's costing sheet, which was completely alien to me. It took me ages to do. It was a real pain in the arse. But similarly, I guess every agent is going to get figures presented in a completely different way. It is strange, isn't it? If you think of the cargo business, right? One of the richest people in the world was the guy that came up with those kind of, those cargo things that come off a ship and go onto the back of a lorry, and he made them all the same size. Okay, just revolutionized that industry over, within a year. Made himself hundreds of millions because he made everybody in the world use the same system. You're not going to make any more money doing it for the costings for concert promoters, but I imagine that the agents would probably like it if everybody adopted the same set of sheets. For instance, we had an industry standard that this is how you present your figures. Make their life a lot easier, wouldn't it?
Well, everybody, and I think that's one of the things about reflecting. Early on, you'd sort of said, like you were talking, we were talking about your past. And the reason for talking about past not only is to share your journey, but to see how much things have changed.
Yeah.
One of my observations is there's loads, and you will know, loads has changed in the live sector, but it's changed by individuals doing individual things. And I guess the point of some of this is to reflect and go, change is going to happen and can happen, but we could also be part of that change. And actually, perhaps what hasn't happened in the industry is that kind of change where we've changed some things that are good for everybody. So you do have, like you just said, you end up filling a form because somebody needs that form in a particular way, but there isn't a consideration about whether that's overall a good thing.
What you'll find that happens is that some bright promoter will come up with a way of doing something that puts them ahead of everybody else. Okay. And then everybody adopts that, whether it's the way that the deals are done, whether it's the way that marketing is done or ticketing is done. Essentially, the industry does improve year on year because of individuals coming up with a better idea of doing something we've all been doing for a long time in a better way. That's why it's a great industry, because everyone has that opportunity. It's a level playing field. It really is. And if someone comes up with a innovative way of marketing shows or ticketing shows or advancing shows, or look at the amount of bleed box offices we have to deal with. Maybe not if you're a promoter in one city, you only work in one venue, but the amount of different box office systems and ticketing systems and whatever that we have to work with, it's so time consuming. It really, really is. I know someone asked earlier on about ticket counts. Should we be giving weekly ticket counts or bi-weekly ticket counts and whatever else? Essentially, as a concert promoter, we're a service provider. We're providing a service to the music industry, and we're providing a service to the artists. And ultimately, if you want to provide a good service, you should do whatever it takes to make your customers happy. Because even though the customers we all need are the ticket buyers, the people that we're really kind of the customers of as promoters, to an extent, even though we're paying them, are the artists and the agents. And whilst you don't want to cede too much power and leverage to the agents and managers and artists, because it's got to be a fair system where everybody can earn from it. Essentially, the people that provide the better service are going to they will benefit from that, won't they? The better you present your marketing and your ticketing, and the more effective you are in all those aspects, then the more likely you are to get business from people. And it shows. If you look at the rise of certain promoters, the reason that they've become successful is because clearly people think that they can do it better than anybody else. So, but I always think there's a big enough pie, the music industry, that if you had to divide up the amount of gigs between all the promoters and all the companies and the agencies and whatever, there is enough to go around. There's enough to sustain an income stream for lots of businesses, for lots of individuals. You've just got to make sure that to get your piece of the pie, you're providing a good service to people.
We've got 15 minutes to go. I'm just looking at some of the questions that have been coming in. There's a couple of things I want to pick up on, so somebody's asked about this. How do you think you make the step from being a sort of from low level artists to medium level and higher artists? Everybody's view on that is different. So some DIY promoters think that stepping up into 100 cap club is a big step, but broadly speaking, from the kind of grassroots into the bigger, maybe to the academies, and
the principles are the same as they were 30 years ago. If you can sell tickets and promote shows, present shows really well, stage the shows really well, look after the artists. I've never ever cut an artist's rider back that I'm aware of. Obviously, these days I have a production team and reps, whatever else, that go and do the shows. But I always thought it's a false economy. If you're losing money, don't cut the band's rider in half. That's ridiculous. The most important thing for you to get a relationship with artists is to look after the bands. Music and the artists are what this industry is all about. You've got to look after people. So if you're gonna try and save money somewhere else. Don't cut back on what you're paying the band. That band might have driven 6 hours in the back of a transit van to get to your gig. When they get there, they don't want to get 4 cans of beer and some half warm burgers in a box kind of thing. Look after the bands as much as you can, because believe it or not, that reputation that gets passed on. People talk about most bands on a club tour. They will remember the gigs where they got looked after more than anything else. They'll remember the gigs where it was packed and the audience were great and it was all kicking off and they had a great night. But they'll also remember the promoters that made the effort and looked after them well. And I took a band back to my house when I first started promoting, because I didn't have the money to pay for them to have a meal somewhere. I took them to my house and did it. I'm not suggesting you need to do that, but just put a little bit of time and effort into looking after the artist, because it'll take you a long way. It really will.
One of our this isn't a great. One of our members said to me once, and this has stayed with me a lot. He said that one of the issues that he has as a promoter is you do all of that work. And this, he was thinking about a grassroots show. You do all that work on the show, and whether the show's gone well or whether it's gone bad, doesn't matter how it's done. He said the problem is for him that at the end of the night is a tour manager or the band sitting over your shoulder while you fill in a settlement sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that's the bit that he wants to get rid of, because you've put all this heart and love and soul and sometimes your own money into the show, or you've had a brilliant show and maybe they're going to make some money, but there's still this kind of weird thing at the end of the night where you have to and he really didn't like that. And that's really stayed with me. Like that bit isn't, because that's not what promoting is about. Ultimately, it is about settlements and sending people payments. But that moment, he wants to get rid of that moment. For what you're talking about there, it's about the rider, isn't it? About turning up and being looked after. And
that's an individual choice, isn't it? Some tour managers don't want to do the settlements on the night. If you're doing a tour, they just want to do it at the end of a tour often. But if you're only promoting one show, then look, technology exists that you could send them all the figures and the scans of your receipts and whatever the day after. That's quite easy for you to do that these days. But often at a club level, the tour manager is possibly doing everything. It's probably it could be the driver and the sound engineer and the tour manager and the artist's mother and father combined. So they often just want to. Could be she. I said he there. Shouldn't have said that. But they often want to just get that bit over with at the end of the night. But you don't have to do it all at the end of the night. You've got a tongue in your head, use it. Give them some figures when they first arrive in the afternoon and just say, look, figures are pretty much done. We'll just fill in these boxes at the end of the night. You don't have to pressurize it. I mean, I've sat in production offices in most cities in this country, sometimes till the early hours with people. I've had people measuring adverts, okay, on an arena tour as well. I've had someone measuring a page of adverts where we've said that advert was going to cost, I don't know, say it was £200 was the cost to that artist. And they've looked at the size of the page and they've measured the adverts to work out if that £200 was their correct proportion of the advertising. So I've sat and done some really tedious settlements over the years, and that is just part. But ultimately that's part of the business. We're paying an artist based upon a set of agreed figures. So it's up to you to negotiate with your tour manager or the agent or whatever else when you present those figures.
That's good advice.
Use the tongue in your head, I'd say.
That's good advice, I think. But that's also, you can be part of that change. That's the thing that can be, and that might make the night more enjoyable for you, or the show more enjoyable for you. We can't have you here without talking about COVID-19. So looking ahead a bit, I mean, you must have shows on sale, shows that you've maybe rescheduled where you thought about a certain capacity. How are you feeling about those shows? How are you feeling about the support that there is or isn't for the promoting industry, in terms of like financial support and other things like the reduction in VAT? What's your views on how it's going to affect you, your company, the musicians?
Well, obviously it's a big topic, and it's something that none of us have ever faced. It's been obviously incredibly difficult, incredibly stressful. I'll just give you an overview as our company. So we've got 16 people that work for Crosstown. We've had 11 of those people furloughed since the very beginning. As soon as that we saw that option, we took that option because we foresaw that we wouldn't have any shows this year, potentially. So we've made some savings there. We've got 2 offices, one in Bristol, one in London. We've moved to a smaller office. I'm now in a smaller office in Bristol because I don't need a big office with lots of staff in it because they're not here, obviously. Thankfully, it's in the same building I was in. Our London landlords have been less than helpful. We've had no support from Islington Council, we're at Islington Borough in our London office. We got a small grant from Bristol City Council, which, everything helps. But in principle, in terms of, we've moved, obviously, when it's all kicked off, we moved loads of shows into the autumn. We had shows in March, April, May that we moved to October, November, December this year. 2 months later, we were then moving them all again into next year. We've still got a few shows on sale from the hardy few that don't want to move them. So we've still got shows that, if you look at our website, that are still on sale for this autumn. Now, we've told all those artists, you need to move the gigs, because in our view, those gigs aren't gonna take place. But we can't force them to, and some of those gigs aren't until November, and some people want to hold out. But where we've had the option to move things, we've moved everything post March next year. Now that means that we'll have gone virtually a whole year without making any money, and we'll be able to, if shows come back in March at full capacity, then a company like ours will probably be okay. But if that doesn't happen, and at the moment everyone's pinning a tail on a donkey for next year, no one really knows for certain when gigs are going to come back. If it goes beyond, if it went beyond June or July next year before there were decent sized gigs, and I'm talking of gigs over 1,000 capacity, there'll be a huge number of companies that go bust.
Well, the poll that we're running at the moment, so
national promoters will go bust if shows don't come back in the first quarter of next year. Okay.
Yeah, we're running this survey, and 47% of the over 300 promoters that have filled in that survey now have said that without financial support coming in from the government, so on top of the existing schemes like you've mentioned, unless they get additional specific support, 47% will fold.
Right. Look, and I do think to an extent, I'm never going to be a Tory voter, and I do think that they've done some. The government have tried to do some things that which have been incredible. The furlough scheme has been incredible. We took out there was a bounce back loan. We took that bounce back loan out. It's just sitting there in our bank account. You can borrow £50,000 and you don't have to pay it back for a year. And when you do, it's 2% interest. So if you can afford to do that, take that bounce back loan. I would, it's there. If you've got a good relationship with your bank, it's relatively easy to get that money through. But I would say that in the medium term, if of this 1.57 billion, if none of it comes through to promoters, we're going to see a huge number of promoters go out of business. Yeah. Because we were the first people to start losing our business, and we're going to be the last people to get it back, unfortunately. And which is just really, really terrible luck for us all. But if you look at the amount of money that has potentially been promised to the creative industries and the arts, that it can't all go to theatres, it can't all go to opera and Glyndebourne and the Minack Theatre and all of these effectively parts of the industry that are really mostly populated by the middle classes. Theatre world and whatever else. There's only a small proportion of the people in this country that actually go to theatre every year. Now, there's still an extensive amount of people, but there are more people that go to concerts per year than go to the theatre. And there are more people that will go to multiple gigs in small venues than will go to multiple theatre productions in small venues. So the music industry is, obviously it's hugely crucial to the culture of this country. And there has been an awful lot of lobbying going on. I know you've been very active, John, and there's been a lot of campaigning throughout the industry, which everyone's been part of, not just some of the more senior promoters. But this is obviously this is a circumstance that none of us have ever faced before, and there's probably not going to be an easy way out of it. Now, I think if you look at the way that the pubs have come back, now, the way that pubs have reopened with their table service and track and trace and names and details and whatever else, the way that that's happened, that was driven by the pub trade. They weren't given those instructions by the government, even though there's documentation online for, there'll be a 40-page set of rules that the pubs have to adhere to. Essentially, that guidance came from the pub trade and experts in the pub trade. And I think that the music industry, we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to seize the bull by the horns. And if we want gigs to reopen, then we're going to have to basically demonstrate to the public and to the and to the government and local authorities that they have to let promoters start staging concerts. And in the absence of a vaccine, if there's no vaccine, if gigs can't happen without a vaccine, then the industry is completely fucked. Okay, it's over. If there can't be any gigs until next September, which might be when we get a vaccine, and who knows, the industry will be on its knees by then. And I'm not just talking about independent promoters. I'm talking about companies like me. I'm talking about companies like Live Nation. I'm talking about, SJM. I'm talking about all the big agencies. If we've got no income till next September, then we're all screwed. So we have to show to the public and the government that essentially we're going to have to take some risk to an extent. I think we're going to have to adopt a track and trace system. We're going to have to do temperature checks at gigs. We might have to have people wearing masks at gigs. But we all know that gigs are not going to operate on social distancing. Venues aren't viable on social distancing. It's not a great experience for people anyway, but you cannot make money. You cannot make those industries work with social distancing because we all know the capacities are too small. Andrew Lloyd Webber came out last week saying that West End theatres need to be operating at 65% capacity on sales alone, just to make them viable. Pardon me. And it's higher for musicals. Concert venues are the same. We're not going to get people touring if they can't earn a certain level of money. And I think that ultimately it's going to take the collective might of the music industry to say, okay, right, this is what we're going to do. And the point is that right now is that none of us know for certain to what extent we're going to have to do that. I wish I could just say, right, I know what we need to do. This is what we need to do. Let's get Oliver Dowden on the phone. This is the easy way to do it. It will solve the problem for everybody. The likes of Stuart Galbraith and Rob Chalice and Phil Bowdry, who are on this cultural task force, they've been talking to government continually for months and months and doing, a very admirable job, doing a great job for all of us. And even though two of those people are effectively competitors to me, I take my hats off to them because they've gone above and beyond what any other promoter has done. But there isn't an easy fix on this. The only fix on this is going to be if essentially we bring risk back into our world, even more risk, by allowing people to come back to full capacity venues with having some sort of temperature check-in, track and trace, and clearly we won't get any insurance. No insurance company is going to cover us for that. So we need the government to come up with an underwritten insurance policy for the music industry, because we already know that anecdotally it seems this 1.57 billion, while some of it might be going to venues, and I know that they've only committed 2.5 million so far to the music venues that are severely under threat, but obviously there'll be more money rolled out. But the things that we're hearing from people like the NTIA are that none of that 1.57 billion is coming to promoters. None of it's coming to the live world. None of it's coming to PA companies, lighting companies, crew companies. So if there isn't going to be an emergency rescue package to sustain our industry, then we're going to have to say to the government, right, stay out of our business. Stay out of our business. We will try and operate our venues as safely as we can. If you look at the way the pubs I've been in quite a few pubs over the last few weeks, a few restaurants. I think that the way they've done that is admirable. Obviously, all their staff have been really well briefed, and I think we just have to do the same thing in our industry. But there will be people that will disagree with it. Ultimately, people don't have to go to a concert if they feel worried about it, and we know that we will lose audiences. Clearly, there will be some parts of the gig-going audience that aren't going to come back as quickly. We've all seen it with I'm sure with refunds that we've all given out. Most of our refunds have bottomed out now. We're now selling more tickets than we're giving refunds for. But that's, we don't know if that's going to continue for a long time. There could be there's going to be a huge increase in unemployment over the next few months. Clearly, once the furlough ends, there'll be a lot of people unemployed in the music industry that companies haven't kept on, because without the guarantee of monies coming through from live music, how are people supposed to pay their wages? So it's a really, really complicated issue, and I wish I had some great answers, but I think that ultimately it is going to be down to us saying to the government, stay out of what we're doing, let us do this ourselves. And clearly we're going to have to, if we can get an underwritten surety from either from the insurance industry, because it's given government backing, or a government initiative that gives insurance for concerts, then I think we've got a chance. So, but we've only got a chance with the people that are prepared to come back with the risk that they could still pick up COVID at a concert. Because if you went to a gig at Bristol Fleece and Firkin and you were temperature checked along with 400 other people and nobody had a temperature, but someone developed COVID a day later, then yes, someone's going to have the onerous job of ringing 400 people or emailing 400 people to let them know that someone at that gig has contracted COVID. But if we don't do that, then we'll never do a gig again until there's a vaccine.
I think the
industry will implode.
The test show at London Palladium showed that there's two routes that I think the industry wants to push in, and both of them they want to see happen. Number one, the show at the Palladium was to say, look, we as an industry can meet all of the public health measures that you're laying down, and people will want to come to that show and wear masks and everything, but the economics of it don't work. So let the houses be full, because we can do everything you're asking of us, and then the economics might work. And that would allow a route for the artists and the audience that want to go to a show to do those shows. Meanwhile, there's another group of people where, for all various reasons, some of those venues can't open or won't open because that doesn't work for them. So we need support to be able to stay closed until such time as we can reopen. And just to follow on from what you're saying, there is some ring-fenced and secured money for venues. You're talking about grassroots music venues, but the Evidence and Music Venues Trust is that when a venue books its own shows, it books 90% of them. But when a venue doesn't book its own shows, 90% of its shows come from promoters. So although we want to protect venues, we need to protect promoters because they're the people who bring in the shows.
Of course we do.
So there is no guarantee at the moment, but that's something that we're lobbying for. So I'm conscious of time. I think we should just bring it. We've been polling people. We said, does COVID make you more nervous about promoting concerts? And 88% said yes.
Well, of course it's going to make you more nervous, but ultimately, I've been in this industry for 30 years. I can't do anything else. I don't want to do anything else particularly. And it's something that we might have to live with. Ultimately, though, it's the public are going to have to live with it as much as anything. And you and I, and if any promoters are watching this now, most of you know that if you put on some hot new band right now, or hot band that that can sell tickets, young people are going to flock back. you know, because they're not viewed as such high risk. But unfortunately, it's not just the audience we need to be thinking about. It's, you know, some artists aren't going to tour, are they? Because of risk. Some people that might have risks of people, you know, at risk in their families. Some venues, you know, obviously are going to have concerns over people that work in their venues that could be more vulnerable. So it's a really complicated situation, and I wish I could just wake up and it's 2022 and it was all a bad dream. But
do you think? So I mean, a final thing. I think you mentioned that you've got, you know, Phil Bowdry, who runs Live Nation, Stuart Galbraith, who someone you used to work with, but now runs Kilimanjaro. So he's probably a friend and competitor.
Yeah.
You know, but you've got these people all coming together to work for the good of their music. Do you think that the future of live music, you know, obviously none of us wish that we're in the position that we're in now, but do you think that some of those coming together of people and the sector, do you think that that bodes well for the future of live music?
There's certainly been more collaboration than ever before. I've been on lots of phone calls with other promoters and talking really openly about the way that our business is trying to adapt to, you know, save money and cut costs, and just trying to get through to whenever gigs will come back. And that's never happened before. It can't be a bad thing, can it? Talking is never going to be a bad thing, is it? Ultimately, no problems ever got solved by people not talking to each other. So I think that the more talking that goes on, then hopefully, you know, we'll get to some sort of solution. There are a lot of really clever people in the music industry, and I'm sure that we will get back to some level of live concerts within the next year. We just don't know to what extent it will be. You know, there will be a new normal. I wish I could say hand on heart I knew what it was gonna look like, but
yeah,
I'm gonna be part of it whatever happens, because I can't do anything else. So,
oh well, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing.
Right.
Loads of feedback already coming in to say thank you for sharing the time with us. And yeah, so just remind, if you don't know already, we're doing a second session on Friday, same time, but with this time with Clement, some Bird on the Wire, and Maz, some Communion. So and they'll both be coming in to talk about their experience and their view as promoters who've been in the game. So Conal's been in the game for 30 years, and they've been in sort of between 10 and 15 years. So there'll be a slightly different starting point. And
they're both really great promoters.
They're also great promoters, but promoting at sort of a different level. They've not done a Knebworth yet, Conal. Maybe they will one day. That'd be a good gig back. That's it. I'm going to leave. So I think Tom will disconnect us now, but just thank you to everybody for coming in. Thank you, Conal, for your time. Best of luck.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, everybody.
Good luck, everybody. Good luck, everyone. Fingers crossed for everybody that you all survive into next year.
Yeah, and if you didn't get your questions read out, you know, please feed. We've got a copy of them. We'll feed some of those questions into Clements and Maz too, because they apply to them as much as they do to Conal.
And I'm happy for anyone to email me as well if you want to. It's Conal@crosstownconcerts.com. Right.
Brilliant.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Thank you, everybody.
See you later.